Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast,
the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
And now, your host, Dustin Jones.
Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Senior Rehab Podcast. No interview today, just me going off the cuff. Me and my glass of red wine. I am currently drinking a glass of Cab Sav Carlo Rossi, aged for many months in a 5-liter plastic bag. A very high-class, expensive wine that you can find at your local Kroger or grocery store. But I just wanted to just kind of reflect on CSM. Anaheim, California, February 2016, my first CSM. And it was freaking nuts. There's just under 12,000 people that descend on the Anaheim Convention Center, whether they're physical therapists, physical therapy assistants, business owners, marketers, sales reps, all different types of people come to talk about rehab and physical therapy. And it was absolutely amazing as well as absolutely exhausting. So it's taken me a couple of days to really recover. But I just want to talk with you a little bit about it. First thing, I'll just talk about some of the sessions that I really enjoyed. First one was Adrienne Low. He is a physical therapist in Iowa, I believe, and he is very well known for his thoughts on pain and how should we think about pain, how should we educate about pain with our patients. And he definitely emphasizes the brain is much more complex than the gate theory, that that nociception does not determine someone feeling pain, that the brain determines what patients feel. And as we all know, the brain takes in many, many inputs and has lots of factors that go into if the brain decides if the patient is going to feel pain. And the way that he presented his discussion was amazing, just very entertaining individual. But he's so wise and so skilled in his metaphors and his stories and how he talks with his patients. And that was very clear throughout his presentation. He definitely emphasizes on telling a story and really trying to make it relatable to the patient, to not use too much medical jargon and use all these big multi-syllable words, but just to keep things simple, so simple that the patient will grasp it and actually get it. And that can ultimately improve outcomes. And so it's very fascinating for me. But one thing that really hit home was that, he talked a lot about the implications of our words and education methods in treating pain, but he definitely made it clear that what we're already doing with our hands, our therapeutic interventions, are still necessary. They're still very applicable and we need to do them, but also recognize that our words and how we educate and how we encourage our patients have a very big impact as well in improving outcomes. Second talk was Changing New Grad Perspectives in Geriatrics. This was put on by the Fox Rehab crew. Heather Cronin, who was a previous guest on the Senior Rehab Podcast, and then a couple other of her colleagues, awesome people. And they basically laid out a framework for how to engage new grads, get them excited about geriatrics, how to educate them, mentor them, usher them into a residency and make them clinical specialists so they can better serve their patients. They also talked about the current perception of geriatric rehab, which we all know is not the most glamorous setting or area of physical therapy. A lot of times students or new grads will think of depends, walkers, pressure ulcers, shuffling gait patterns, all these things that aren't necessarily sexy with older adults, but that doesn't have to be the case. It doesn't have to be very boring and plain seated therapeutic exercise. You can actually get people up and doing some pretty unique things, which, is no surprise to you if you listen to this podcast. But it's just very clear in their talk of how we have a lot of work to do to change perceptions so we can advance, this little niche of physical therapy that we have ourselves in. And the next one that stuck out was the patient panel put on by Jerry Durham and sponsored by a few companies and I believe the women's health section, which may potentially be going through a name change. but it was pretty amazing. Jerry Durham gets up, introduces the people. If no one's familiar with Jerry Durham, he is quite the character. He has his podcast as well. I'll link to that in the show notes. But he just introduces them, and the patients just talk, for an hour each. Patient from Chicago, Erin Jackson, I believe, she went to Entropy Physiotherapy, which is Sandy Hilton's clinic in Chicago. And then Lisa Maxura, or Lisa Mac and Cheese on Twitter, as many of you have probably interacted with her. She's from Arizona, and she worked with Eric Christensen, I believe. Both of those PTs were in the audience. And it was amazing just to hear their perspective. These people, which their story is not too different from a lot of what we deal with, but they've just been through the ringer. They have literally seen every person along the way in the healthcare system, that they have been through our amazing healthcare system, and they're kind of chewed up and spit out on the other end. A lot of times, they had just terrible things that were said to them, things that are hard to even imagine that a clinician would say, that literally left them with no hope whatsoever. But these therapists, Sandy Hilton and Eric Christensen, were there to provide hope. They were hope dealers for these patients. And just to hear the impact that these people had in encouraging the patients and giving them hope, giving them a framework to get better and to become more independent, it was just absolutely amazing. But to hear it from the patient's perspective, not the therapist's perspective, is very valuable. And I believe it is very tough for you and me to really get in the heads of our patients, especially, say, in home health, where people for years or decades have just gone through the ringer, and it's very hard to even begin to put myself in their shoes. So this panel made me very aware of that, and it was a big impact for many other therapists as well. And I know they're pushing to do more of these patient panels in the future, hopefully next year at CSM. And lastly, it was the last discussion on Saturday, and it was about mentoring millennials. And it was just a panel, very casual. I actually left halfway because I had to meet someone, but just to see the interactions of these people and to see how something as simple as Twitter has literally changed the direction of their lives, especially these millennials. There were 3 of them up there that they had amazing job opportunities. They are pretty well known or well respected in our field. They're able to speak at these national conventions. And a lot of this grew just from social media. And it just blows my mind that there is that much of a tangible impact by developing professional relationships through Twitter, which is probably a good opportunity to move on to some of the themes that really struck me. First one was Twitter. I mean, it just blows my mind that I could interact with several of you listeners and non-listeners, throughout the weeks and the months on Twitter, sharing articles, conversating about different things. And I can show up at this conference where I know no one except for, my former professors. I can show up and I can see someone, I can recognize their face from their profile picture and literally just go up and give them a hug. Now, granted, it wasn't awkward. For me, at least, maybe awkward for them, but I felt comfortable giving them a hug and starting to conversate and just connect with them. I know where they live, I know where they work, I know what setting they're in, and man, it just builds some really unique relationships that I haven't really experienced before. And the best story that really encapsulates this is I met with one of my former professors. We went on a long walk, and then we decided to get some beers at the Marriott bar, which is where I spent many of my nights. Along with Carl's Jr. or Hardee's for you East Coasters. We were sitting at the bar or sitting by the pool, drinking some beers. And then Ryan Smith walks in, who is a DPT student that I connected with through Twitter. He sits down, starts talking with us. We start striking up a conversation. Then another physical therapist walks in, and another, and another, and another. And before you know, we have roughly around 6 physical therapists sitting at this table, all, drinking a beer, having a good time, conversating with one another, sharing stories. All these therapists didn't know each other before we sat down for the most part. and we were all in different settings, but the thread running in between all these people was Twitter, and it just blew my mind. I've never experienced anything like that. Maybe some of you younger listeners have experienced that, but it was absolutely crazy, and it really surprised my professor, who had not really seen the power of social media and Twitter. So I say all that just to encourage you, the listener. If you are not on Twitter, consider it. I know social media has its baggage. I can be addicted at times for sure. But it can have a tangible impact on your skill level, on potential opportunities down the road. And especially if you are a home health physical therapist, I highly encourage you to jump on there, because it is such an easy way to stay current on current research, on thoughts, on different techniques. And just to be well connected in your field, because most of us know as home health PTs, it is very easily to live a life in isolation. Next theme that jumped out was just the excitement for geriatric rehab. I mentioned the Fox Rehab crew did an awesome job with their session, but just so many of the conversations that were had at that conference. A lot of them evolved around how can we do things better. A lot of sessions mentioned of how we undertreat older adults and how things need to change. And a lot of conversations at the bar circled around that as well. Got to meet the president of the home health section, Dee Cornetti. She's going to be a future podcast guest. But man, just to hear her passion, her excitement for advancing home health, but then also geriatric rehab was really cool to hear. Also, the MedBridge crew, which is probably one of the better continuing education platforms on the internet. They have traditionally been pretty strong in the sports ortho courses, but now they're interested in producing courses for home health PTs and other clinicians that work with older adults. And they were asking, me and a few other PTs over a beer of what would be helpful. What do we want to know and learn, so they can build those courses. So that's pretty exciting, because we've kind of been, on the black sheep of the rehab world in a way, which that seems that it could potentially be changing. And then the last thing that really stuck out to me was the students. The DPT students are rock stars. I mean, granted, this is a little biased because we're, at this convention center at this big conference. And, most students that are going to come to this are either getting their trip for free, paid by the school, or they're just really motivated students. But regardless of that, a lot of them are just so motivated to change the current state of rehab, not just geriatric rehab, but just, rehab in general. And it's motivating for me as well. But it's really interesting just to see how smart they are. They have, the ability to learn so much just by, sitting on their computer. Knowledge that was once, kept high up in the ivory tower is now free on the internet. And a lot of them just soak it up like a sponge. And I'm excited to see them learn how to apply that knowledge in its proper context and, lead our field. And so when I'm old and gray, I definitely think I'll be in good hands. Last but not least, the major theme for me at the end of the day was just, man, I'm super thankful. I'm thankful for the opportunities that this podcast has created, the relationships that I've been able to build, just the ability to connect with people that care about working with older adults. I cannot tell you how amazing it is to have someone come up to you and ask, hey, are you that guy that does that Senior Rehab Podcast? It blows my mind that someone other than my mother and father listen to this, but then to know that someone, hopefully you, are actually benefiting from this material. It's very humbling. I'll say that for sure. This endeavor, podcasting, can be pretty lonely. You work hard, you document, then you come home and sit in front of your computer and talk into a microphone, and you get some feedback every once in a while on social media, emails, reviews, which I value greatly. I don't want to downplay that, but man, there's something about putting a face to one of the listeners or someone that gains from your content, and that's just awesome. So I'm excited. I'm excited for the future of this show, of continuing to try and build on what we've done so far. And you are a big part of that. You listening to this show, actually downloading it, and hopefully sharing it with someone else that could benefit from it is building a group of people that are wanting to change geriatric rehab, to change how we care for older adults and change the perception of what we do. We're rolling in about 15 minutes now, and I just finished my glass of wine, so it's a good time to wrap up. Thanks again for your time, for listening, for supporting this show. Please share this with one other person that it could benefit if you have found it beneficial. Until next episode, I encourage you and hope that you will continue to stay funky.